Welcome back to Not a Straight Line with me, Pete Daly-Dickson. This is the show that explores the non-linear journeys of artists and entrepreneurs to inspire you as you zigzag through your own non-straight line life. And this week, I get philosophical, economical, and entrepreneurial with Isaiah Baker. Isaiah has enjoyed great success with a career on Wall Street that emerged from his grit and determination to achieve financial security for his family. But of course, as we know, it was a non-straight line journey that led him there and to where he is today, the owner of a franchise in South Florida, a world apart from Wall Street. A self-described outsider who enjoyed writing, economics, and philosophy, Isaiah was thrust into basketball by his father from an early age. And at 20, he found his mother after she'd attempted suicide. He acknowledged in our conversation that early trauma can sometimes lead to great things, even if for the wrong reasons. And now, as I said, he's taking entrepreneurship for a spin in South Florida and wants to provide the best for his family. There's no way this introduction can do his journey justice, so you just have to keep listening to our conversation. So I mentioned just before I hit record there, Isaiah, that we do a little breathing exercise at the beginning of these conversations just to bring the three of us, you, me, and the listener, into the same space together. It's called a physiological sigh. 2 deep breaths in through the nose, held slightly at the top for a second, and then breathe out through the mouth. So the three of us, we're going to all close our eyes, and we're going to do that 3 times, and then we'll jump off the deep end and see where we go. So close your eyes and just breathe in. Isaiah Baker, welcome to Not a Straight Line. It's such a joy to have you with me.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you for having me.
Just talking about that, before we do jump off of the deep end, as we kind of just edge our way to the tip of the diving board, you want to just tell the listener how we've actually got into this conversation?
Yes, sure. I published on a whim a little bit, post on Substack or launched a Substack that described my most recent journey, which was I have moved down to South Florida and basically started a small business. I guess technically, started to open a branch of a franchise. It's a parking lot striping enterprise. And that was pretty shocking because prior to that, I was a derivatives trader at Goldman Sachs for a number of years. The post, which I thought, wasn't going to really go very far, wound up reaching a decently sized audience, still really small by a lot of other comparisons. And I think it struck a chord with a lot of people. You reached out, I think you DM'd me on Substack actually, after reading it.
You're like, who's this weirdo, eh?
Asking if, or you said you had a podcast about people who have, radical changes in their lives or in things. I don't know if you actually named it Not a Straight Line in there, but asked if I'd be open to joining. And, we had a kind of short phone conversation shortly after. And I, listened to a few of the episodes and said I would love to join. So here I am.
I mean, when I read that article, I was just like, well, if that's not an archetypal non-straight line or one part of a non-straight line journey, then I don't know what the heck is. But when you reflected on the question that I gave you before you came on the show today, is that the shift, the zag that came to mind, or was there something else?
It was not. No, my life has been full of zigs and zags, as you frame them. It feels in the moment probably the most dramatic for a lot of reasons, but I would say probably the biggest zag was actually sort of the story of how I got onto Wall Street now, over a decade ago, which was I got injured, but beyond that, I actually found my mother in a suicide attempt. that really, I think, was a big shakeup for a lot of reasons. And there's a lot more to that, but that set me off, I think, on a wholly different path from what I was probably looking at and thinking about doing with my life in general.
How old were you then?
I think I was 19 or just about to turn 20 at the
Okay.
time.
Wow.
Yeah, I was coming after my freshman year in college. I was a college basketball player, and I had severely injured myself. I'd herniated my L4, L5 vertebrae my freshman year, and I was just really struggling to get back on my feet. So I remember it was the middle of the summer or early summer, and I was coming back from a basketball workout, and my parents, while I was away, they had lost their house. This was like, in the aftershocks of the global financial crisis. They had a, resetting mortgage, subprime mortgage. They just went past their means. And shortly before that, my mother had also lost her job. And so I walked into this tiny apartment that they had in a new space. And it was supposed to just be me and her there. And I just found her, laying face down on the living room floor,
Oh my God.
and that changed a lot of stuff in my life. Yeah. Fortunately, she survived.
What did you do?
I remember just sort of like kind of like looking at her, trying to, shake her a bit. And she wasn't totally knocked out. She was a bit responsive, but could tell something was wrong. And yeah, I called the police. They brought in a stretcher, called my father, who was out at the time. And the EMTs came in, took her to the hospital, and then, just tried to, collect ourselves, and then went to go visit her shortly after. But it was a really jarring experience. I guess I call that a monumental shift because really prior to that, like I said, I was a college basketball player. My dad was a professional basketball player who's had a really intense life full of zigs and zags on his own. But I've multiple cousins who are professional basketball players. I was a Division I basketball player, and my sister was a Division I basketball player. Basketball was just sort of what I always thought was life. And between being injured and not, having that sort of evaporate, and then seeing this culmination of, I would say, mental illness and also, financial stress really reach the zenith with that. It pushed me to really start looking for, okay, what am I going to do?
Could you have recovered from that injury, or is that a kind of injury that you don't get back to playing the level of basketball that you played?
No, you certainly can. It takes a long time. I feel like, I mean, I wasn't an amazing basketball player. Let me, like, I don't want any misgivings of that. But I'm 6'8", and I potentially could have eked something out overseas. Maybe nothing as glorious as like my father or anything like that, but I could have probably put together a decent career.
Is that what you really wanted, or was there a sense of you doing it because it's what you did?
I don't know. Like I always look back at, growing up, I was always in gyms, and I was a gym rat. And my father, I grew up in the Philadelphia area. My father is sort of like a local basketball legend around there. He was always coaching and things of that nature. But you see these men who are 50, 60, sometimes even older, still just hanging around in gym shorts and stuff. And it does sort of leave you with the question of, is there more to this? And I do remember having that question of like, is this all that life could be? But at the same time, from my perspective, it did seem like really like what it should be about, what life should be about. Going to or having that experience, I think, just pushed me to go to try to seek out financial security, which led to working my way onto Wall Street, which is a whole nother escapade. And then further, once I was there, then seeking a lot more out of life, which culminates a little bit in part to how I'm here today.
What were you studying at college, out of interest?
I was studying economics and math, and also a little bit of philosophy. Those were my focuses. So I was an econ major, and at the time I was going to be a math minor. just continuing taking math courses, but not pursuing the minor, and same with philosophy, basically. I don't think I actually ever declared it as my minor, but I couldn't get enough of that stuff. So
you couldn't get enough of
philosophy, yeah.
how so?
I did always enjoy kind of trying to think and make sense of the world. I think I've always been sort of, I guess, like a space cadet, somebody who would like zone out and try to think big thoughts. Growing up, when you grow up in a household where there's a lot of issues, and I don't mean to paint my parents in a bad light, or my upbringing in a bad light. Like, I was very blessed that, both my parents still married, loved each other deeply, but my mother was constantly dealing with mental health issues, severe depression, perhaps bipolar disorder. My father, who, like I said, he was a professional basketball player, wound up getting really severely injured and battling drug addiction. He was actually homeless for a period of time, and he actually lost the use of his left arm, his non-dominant hand, or his non-dominant arm, had it amputated, and was handicapped basically for the whole time I've known him. He got injured, I think he was 24, 23, and there was still a lot of things that he was dealing with in terms of, I guess, what people would call PTSD, or trauma or whatnot. I'm not super in love with those terms, but and also addiction.
You're not in love with those. You're not in love with those terms in relation to your father, or just in general. And how so? Why?
In general, I mean, PTSD, there's certainly, grounding for it, but I think trauma is an oversimplified term for events that happen in life. And I think it solely casts, and I'm speaking way too broadly here. Let me caveat it with that. I'm speaking way too broadly and probably too liberally, but like, I think if you cast hard times and solely in the terms of trauma, it kind of over focuses the lens of what it is on the negative of that. I've listened to your podcast before. You obviously are aware that difficulties, hard times, even traumatic things can also lead to rather significant and brilliant outcomes, right?
Amen.
Just in sort of the, what's people would call like Al Quran of our time, like the popular nomenclature is very focused on healing from trauma and these types of things. And I don't know. I think, if you think of trauma as something you heal from, then you automatically assume that it's an illness and you're sick. And I'm very sensitive to those types of, that type of labeling. I think it narrows the focus down of what's possible in any situation. So, I'm not too enamored with either of those phrases.
What's your? So we know that you played basketball. You're always in the gym. Just go back a few years, even than that. Perhaps not as far as kindergarten, but what else was Isaiah really into, and kind of what turned you on?
Yeah, I was a little nerd growing up. I was a little before I started playing basketball late, even though my father was a professional and all this stuff. He grew up in a really abusive household. My grandfather, his father was an alcoholic, would beat him physically and also really berate him emotionally.
Hmm.
And kudos to him. He always made sure to never really push my sister or I, especially young, towards whatever we wanted to be. But I always had in my mind that I wanted to play basketball, but I've never actually played, which is it's just weird.
You thought you'd be able to turn it on just because it was in the genes.
Something like that. I don't know. I mean, I literally remember being like, 8 and thinking like, yeah, I'm gonna play basketball, but like didn't even play in like a rec league or anything like that. And one day when I was 11, my dad just came home. He's like, by the way, we signed you up for like rec league basketball. And I was like, what? He was like, the first game's tonight. I'm like, what? You want me to actually play? But I was chubby little kid. I love computers, love video games. I used to like devour all of the like Maximum PC and all the gaming computer magazines. What I used to do is I used to go on newegg.com, pick all the parts I would assemble for a hypothetical computer. We never had the money to actually buy it, but I would like go and construct, oh, this is the motherboard I would have. This is the video card. Yeah, this is the CPU.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Oh no, I don't know if it was cool, but
Well, you were doing what you could. You were doing what you could to realize a dream that you had with the means that you had available, in a way.
no, absolutely, yeah. And but that was like what I was really into. I was never. I became a reader later in life. Yeah, honestly, like more so like post college. But I would just, yeah, I would devour gaming magazines, PC magazines, and stuff like that.
Before you started playing basketball, although you knew that it was just kind of, in the family and probably in your genes, as well, with your height and stuff. Did you have any sense of where your life might go when you were that sort of age, kind of really immersed in computers and games?
No, I don't think I had any idea. I mean, I was more caught up in like Fantasyland type stuff. I mean, like I loved Star Wars, for example, like really deep into, whatever the extended universe, as it's called. But I think, I was all like I said, I was always just sort of like daydreaming and like visualizing what it would be like to be, whatever, a Jedi or any of this type of stuff. And I look back at it now, and I still find myself really a lot of times in contemplation of what of hypotheticals and things of that nature. But I think I really tried to make a shift of focusing on like actual realities, instead of sort of make believe lands. But I think, yeah, I've always been sort of somebody who would like, my ideal day is probably, which is ironic because I just constantly find myself busy and doing stuff. Is really just I would like sit and read and just think, and think about whatever it is, whether it's this ancient history or like philosophical ideas of why people act the way they do or how the world shapes out. But, keep getting pulled back in, keep getting pulled back into the world of doing, which, despite my best efforts.
You you
So,
you you shared at the beginning of a conversation, Isaiah, how we first got connected, and it was through your writing. Was that something? Is that something that's kind of come around fairly recently, or did you always kind of recognize as that being in you?
no, I started I first think I was always decent in school, which I don't think is actually a positive thing. I'm not a fan of sort of the education system as it stands. And I
Why
actually
not?
think that, well, I think that what education, especially I would say public education, which I went to up until high school, and I was fortunate enough to get into some very elite local private schools because of basketball. I think it's more around, I would say, obedience training and conditioning for people to get on sort of this, assembly line that is laid out for people where they go and they go to school for 12 years. They're their most energetic and lively time of life when they're most creative probably and can have the most energy to even follow up on those ideas. They're locked into a schoolhouse and forced to ask to even get up to go to the bathroom. I think there is a value in memorizing things and arming yourself with facts or anecdotes that can contextualize stuff in the world. But I do think that rote memorization without any real concrete ties to what's going on also just conditions people to really rely on others on what to think and how to think about. I'm a big fan of John Taylor Gatto, passed I think in 2019, but he was a school teacher for 30 years in the New York City public schools, and he won New York City Teacher of the Year I think 3 times, New York State Teacher of the Year once, because he was able to get remarkable results from his kids who he taught 7th and 8th graders, and he did it literally by breaking the rules every day, by basically kicking them out of class and making sure that they were doing important things in their community in New York City, and in projects that both really followed what they felt were passions and interests, but then also really difficult and taking on serious difficult tasks. And if I would highly recommend people look into to him for the American school system, because there's just like a wealth of both knowledge on one, how the system came to be, and he does a decent job of tracing it out. It's not perhaps as he doesn't do it as formally or well cited as a research paper, but also he does a really great job of exposing sort of the conditioning habits that school really forces on kids.
Do you think there is also that's partly where they call it conditioning or the expectation that life is a straight line, that you go to school, you go to college, and you get a job, and you kind of progress through that job and your career, maybe different companies, but it's like it is a straight line. It's
Yeah.
do you think that's where it's set?
I think that is, look, that's the easiest or the earliest point that interaction, that influence reaches people, right? You're moved through, like I said, an assembly line of go to school, get a degree, work for somebody for 40 years, then then at the end of this or somewhere in between, you'll find economic fulfillment, you'll find personal gratification and fulfillment. Those teases are sort of dangled at people that this is what life is all about, and it's not sui generis, right? Like, it's not true to the individual or unique to the individual. And I think that's the big part that's elided out of it right there. But I think that, to answer your question directly, I think it hits kids earliest when they're most vulnerable, perhaps. But I don't think it's the only thing. I think a lot of how, and I hate when people go on like diatribes about modernity or whatnot, but I think a lot of institutions and things in our society point towards that. Whether you look at signaling from the media, I would say certainly the way that our job market is set up with credentialing and gatekeeping, HRification of it leads to that. I would say family pressure too. Like informal social pressure. A lot of our family and friends have gone through the same assembly line, gone through the same meat grinder. So it's sort of a bit of maybe Stockholm syndrome or something like that, where they think it's what's best. And it's hard to state when you have all of these different pressures of the government in there as well, and NGOs. When you have all of these pressures stating that this is the way forward, it's insanely hard, especially if you're a parent and you care for your loved one, right? To say anything different, you run the risk of being wrong and not having anybody else to point to but yourself, right? We just came through COVID, right? Where, not to go on a fringe, but there were a lot of, I would say at this time, that we know for a fact, official type of guidelines and things for they were rather ridiculous. Sit down and take a mask off, stand up and put it on. That if you went against them or even pointed out sort of the ridiculous nature of them, you stood apart from the crowd, right? And so, if you're wrong but you're with everybody else, you can at least say I was with everybody else. If you're wrong and you're by yourself, then who else do you have to point to but yourself?
I don't think you're so much on the fringe now with that. I think the longer time goes by, people are realizing that things probably weren't as they seemed or they were told.
There were a painful few years there.
Yeah.
I'll say
Yeah.
lost friends and almost, yeah. Either way, it's neither here nor there.
Talking about painful, I wanted to just go back to that time when you went into your apartment and your mum's lying on the floor. Did you think she had died?
I didn't know what to think. I mean, I pretty immediately ran over to her and she was responsive, so I was hopeful. In a lot of ways, coping with it, you do feel like you're mourning. I think when you're dealing with depression, it's it's a very narcissistic type of issue where I think the entire world kind of comes down to the immediate sphere of yourself. And I don't say that without, empathy, obviously for my mother. But what else could it be when you think that your problems are the monumental problems of existence, right?
Mm,
And
mm.
it's just that point. And when somebody who you love tries to kill themselves, you can't help but ask, like, well, what were we all supposed to do? I think about that now, especially as a father, right? Like, decisions that I would have made potentially as a younger man when I didn't have that type of responsibility is much different now that I have a wife and a child. So I guess, does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You said earlier on, Isaiah, that you'd already been injured, so you suspected that you wouldn't. be able to continue your basketball career. And it was seeing the financial stress and obviously physical reality of what that caused your mum to do, the mental anguish and what have you.
Yeah.
That put you on the path to ending up working for Goldman Sachs. So how quick was that? Did you finish your degree? Did you think when you were doing your degree that you might end up on Wall Street or in finance? Or I mean, you studied economics after all.
I did study economics. So basically, when that happened, I was just like, okay, I gotta do something. I gotta do something to make sure that when I raise a family or whatever I wind up in, I'm not in this type of situation. I was going to College of the Holy Cross, which is a small liberal arts college up in Massachusetts. It's a decent academic school, but it's not, it's not considered. People might get mad, but it's not considered, on the lines of an Ivy League school, Harvard or Yale, or like a Stanford or U Chicago. And even further, it's not it doesn't even have a finance major, which, so the outsider really study economics, finance, but from the inside, you basically have people who study at, UC Berkeley financial engineering who are, putting together derivatives packages and pricing stuff when they're in college, when they're sophomores or whatnot. And you have me who's just studying supply and demand curves for, whatever, guns and butter, which are much different.
A little bit.
A little bit. I remember a few years even before my mother's attempt, I was taking an econ course in high school, it was like this weird elective school. And I went to this quirky private school. It was a great teacher who did it. But we watched this movie, Inside Job. It was about the financial crisis. They went through like all the hedge fund traders and guys at specifically at Goldman. It was a little uncanny, who made, tens of millions of dollars off of subprime mortgages or mortgages in general. And I remember seeing like the fabulous lives that these people were living versus like the fights and arguments and things that were going on at home. And just thinking like, it's sort of like a game, it's like, I'm just on the losing side. Kind of, I guess my basketball mindset peeking through there. But after I found my mother like that, I was like, all right, I got to find a way to make sure that I'm not in a financially unstable place. So I literally went, when I got back, right to the career development center on campus. I was just thinking like, all right, what is this whole Wall Street thing? Like, I didn't know anything. Like I couldn't tell you what equity was, maybe could tell you what debt was, like didn't know a thing. But I hounded them to figure out, what it would take to get a job or an internship on Wall Street, put together my first resume ever.
What did it have on it? Because you haven't had any jobs up to now, have you? Or did
I had
you?
no jobs. My first official job wound up being as an intern, I guess, if you want to consider that job, or full time at Goldman Sachs. But I mean, it was part of different clubs and stuff and organizations and on the basketball team. So you feel,
Yeah, you fill it out. Try to give them as much of an insight into who Isaiah is as you could, I guess.
Exactly. I kept showing up, kept being persistent, and kept doing whatever I needed to do to make inroads with them. I started, and then they said, okay, this kid is serious. And then they gave me access to this alumni list of people all across Wall Street, or in general. And I just kept really being persistent. I cold call or cold emailed. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, over 100 people probably contacted or connected with 30 or 40 in different areas of finance, just giving them a spiel of, I'm an injured basketball player. I'm trying to figure out what I actually want to do with my life. I've never actually gotten to the backstory of like my mother or anything like that. And essentially, what was open were within, Wall Street were opportunities for investment banking, for wealth management, and then also for sales and trading. And investment banking was known to be really grueling. Maybe I should have pursued it, but I comparatively to the other two, or really to just sales and trading, I didn't want to do that. Wealth management seemed much more of like a networking heavy, I don't want to say like good old boys club, but something that I just wasn't necessarily super interested in. I went to one high school that was really just very Tony, and I just did not have a good time with it. And so it felt like I would be swimming in those same waters. So I didn't do that. But the stick with sales and trading, which I wound up going in, or pursuing and going into, was that it was fast paced. It was based on current events, and a lot of athletes, former athletes, really thrived. So I'm like, all right, let me do that. And so I would literally skip class to try to call people whenever they could, and I was reading all types of primers on how to, what is finance, what is Wall Street, how to get in. Literally asking friends, borrowing books to do this type of stuff. I made it like a full-time job to pursue this, networked with people across a variety of different banks. And finally, there was one person who was on the equity sales trading desk, that for shorthand, the equity sales and trading division at Morgan Stanley, who was a former basketball player at Holy Cross, which Holy Cross was not a target school. We would get literally like 2 or 3 kids who would get internships per year, every year onto Wall Street. And he wound up getting me in for an interview for what's called a super day for an internship at Morgan Stanley. This is while I'm a sophomore. So it was really rare, really, really fortuitous. And I mean, I studied my ass off for this thing. And I go in, and I get in probably at like 6 or 7 a.m. and you're there for over like 5, maybe 6 hours or whatnot. And you do back to back to back to back interviews. And it's kind of like trying to see if you can take the stress of being on the trading floor and all these different types of questions everywhere from where do you think the S&P is going to be in a year to, how many golf balls could fit in a 747, which I actually don't think I was ever asked, but I had at the time had an answer prepared.
And do you remember looking back how you felt during that day?
Nervous, definitely nervous. I mean, I'd never really been in a true professional setting. I had to go buy a suit for like from Joseph A. Bank, one of the really cheap suits there, and like just sort of almost like wondering if people would figure me out. But I also, you feel like you just don't have anything to lose. Like, well, okay, I'm here, I'm down in Times Square at Morgan Stanley's offices, walking onto the trading floor for the first time to be interviewed. At some point you just got to say like, okay, I'm here, what am I going to do? I'd never been really a good person under pressure. I actually used to get like overly nervous before big games and stuff like that, and I would have like a lot of, I guess, performance anxiety, and it was a real big issue. But this felt really different. Like I was just like, all right, what else? What else? Kept thinking about like my mother, like all the stuff I was trying to escape from, and you just do it.
You had a big why.
Yeah. And so I got out of the interview. It went, I thought, relatively well. And then Morgan Stanley is right in Times Square. I literally walk out the door and I realize I'm in New York City, and I had, a little bit less than half a day, but I had been contacting all these other people across Wall Street. And so I wanted to like go meet with as many people as I could. And so literally I emailed, shot people emails and stuff like that. And I ran across the street to Barclays. I met with a couple of the traders there, shot over town to UBS, met a couple of traders there. And I think I had 3 alums, maybe 4 alums from Holy Cross who I connected with at Goldman. And all 3 were out except one guy who, he wasn't even in sales and trading. He was actually in their HR division. But I was like, okay, this guy was nice enough to pick up the phone and talk to a 20-year-old who knew nothing. Let me just go down and shake his hand and buy him a coffee or whatnot. So I wound up doing that and sitting down talking with him. And while we're talking, this woman walks by. He's like, hey, can you talk to this kid for a second? And so I do. And, I give her my spiel, because you have your little elevator pitch and all that stuff ready. And it turns out she's the head recruiter for the summer internship program. And she was like, hold on. And like, I'm going to send you down to the trading floor to talk to like one of the head traders. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. I wind up going down, and I meet with this person, and they instantly start grilling me. And I remember I forget what the first question was. I think it was like, what is like 9 cubed or something like that. And like I walked them through, because all these questions are more about like you walking someone through their process and like how to do this. And I walked them through that. And he goes, all right, well, what's the square root of 2? I believe it was, or what's the square root of 3? And I'm like, you know what? I could walk you through this again, but I've already memorized it out to 5 digits. Is this? And then he was like, okay. And then I think we spent the rest of the time talking a little bit about markets and then probably a lot about NBA basketball. I was out the door. Morgan Stanley wound up offering me for the summer internship for my sophomore year. Off that and the interactions I had, Goldman counter offered me, and I wound up going with Goldman. It's the time I felt it was a little bit more prestigious and dynamic, and then came back for my sophomore or for my junior summer internship. Wound up getting a job and then worked there for 8 years.
And what would you say? What would you say is the biggest lesson, if there is one, to be taken from that whole, right from seeing your mum on the floor to actually getting these two offers?
I'd say, I've never claimed to be anything else besides, I would say, stubborn and lucky. Some head of a charity organization, when I told him that whole story and I said how lucky I was, which I do consider myself really fortunate, he just says luck is just what happens when preparation meets opportunity, which I think
Absolutely.
it's true,
Mm.
but you never know how things will shake out. But I would say just being really persistent with things. I think that's always sort of how I approach different things, and not really paying attention to whatever else is out there, naysayers or whatnot. I had naysayers who said people who said I would never get a college scholarship, be a Division I basketball player, and I did it. I used to tell people, "Hey, like I want to work at Goldman before I got the internship," and literally people would laugh, like sometimes in my face. And like even now, I left a very highly esteemed career at a very prestigious firm to do something that seems really ridiculous and arcane and goofy. But I have a certain vision for what I'm trying to do and what I was seeking out, and you just have to be, I think, really stubborn. Not that I've even been successful so far in this venture or anything like that, but I'm using those same factors that I rely upon.
The word you just used there, Isaiah, is what I took away from the story that you told about how you got into Goldman Sachs. It's vision. You seem to have a really clear idea of what you wanted and why you wanted it, and that was what kind of allowed you to be stubborn, because you knew what you were being stubborn for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think part of it is like I've always been a bit of an outsider. I mean, like I'm 6'8", or I think that's 2.03 meters for the just to translate for you. My wife or my mother is a small Jewish lady. My dad is 6'8", like I said, has one arm and walks with a limp. And they've lived crazy lives, and so I've always been a bit of an outsider. I always say I'm a brunette in a blonde town, which I think affords me to be not very tied to what other people think in a lot of ways. And so perhaps this vision, I think it's more so because I look at like what I was doing even then, and it wasn't certain like what I was searching for. I knew I was searching for something, or when I was at Goldman and I wound up exiting, like I was searching and continue to search for something. And it's not like I'm gifted with some type of prophetic foresight, but I think I'm able to say like I want to go out there and find something or figure something out. And it might like a search might look ridiculous from the outside, but at the end of the day, that doesn't. I hear it, and I definitely, I am actually like a very sensitive person in terms of like, but at the end of the day, like I still am able to prioritize. I think, okay, like I need to do something different and figure that out, even if it ruffles feathers or even if it makes me stick out. You just if you need to do it, you have to live with yourself at the end of the day. So
So we've spent a bit of time looking at how you got into Goldman Sachs, and I do want to explore your probably non-straight line journey within Goldman Sachs. But before that, I want to go to the end and kind of just explore with you. Well, firstly, why did you leave? And secondly, why leave to go and paint stripes on parking lots in Florida when you live in New York? I mean, that was what captured me about your story on Substack. It just seemed like 90 degrees away from what you're doing.
yeah, I had always I think had an entrepreneurial bent. I really wanted to know what it would be like to work for myself, to make money for myself. I wouldn't say I was a rock star at Goldman, but I was a very solid performer. I think I outperformed the mean at the very least. But I mean, there were definitely people who were more highly regarded as traders and whatnot there. So I don't want any misgivings about it. But and again, I think maybe I might have come across probably too harsh in that first Substack essay, but it was an ill fit for the type of personality that I was. And, I think like I said, I've always, or, the stubbornness, I always want to pursue my own type of path. And, naturally on a trading desk, within an institution the scale of Goldman, it's not going to be a perfect fit there. And that's not a dig at, the team I worked with or my managers, but it was much more, hey, like I need to do something different for my own fit. And I really felt like I wanted a challenge, like there was more out there that I could be doing. And so
How long was that kind of sitting with you?
in different ways for many years, like 5 or 6 years, like the majority of the time, and like only sort of, I think, like escalating and maturing in terms of like from a, hey, maybe I should be doing something different, to, all right, no, I need to solidify into like, okay, we need to be doing something different. And I've been kicking around the idea of basically buying an existing small business for years now. I'm from Philadelphia originally, like I think I mentioned, and I was actually looking at buying a landscaping business. This was back in 2021. This is even before I got married and still during COVID, and just didn't have as much. I wasn't as liquid in terms of capital. It wasn't the right time, but more, within my last year there, I started to really revisit that idea and think like, hey, like, wouldn't it be cool to be the captain of my own ship with something? And so my wife and I, we came up with a plan. We were going to do what was called a search fund. I guess we launched our own self-funded search fund, meaning just using our own cash, looking to buy a pre-existing business. And we had a really regimented process. We looked through, I would say, probably like 200, 300 different listings for businesses, sign, roughly like 2 dozen NDAs, doing deeper due diligence. And there's this whole world of what are called search funds that look to buy pre-existing businesses. It's very hot within the business school MBA community. And so it's competitive. And the expected time for completion with that is up to 2 years. And so our thesis of what we wanted to be in South Florida. We were also looking a little bit in Philadelphia, a little bit in Indianapolis, where my wife is from, to be around family. But ideally, I think we wanted to be in South Florida for a variety of reasons, which neither here nor there. And we were 3, 4, 5 months into this process, and a franchise broker came into my LinkedIn inbox, who happened to be an alum of Holy Cross, mentioned, would we be interested in franchises? And I think I'm always the type of person that'll be like, probably not, but I'll at least hear you out. Our investment thesis of what we were looking for was, we wanted a very straightforward business. We wanted it to be a B2B, services based business. Ideally, what's called mission critical, which means like if the work needs to be done, it needs to be done. Like nothing else is taking precedence over it. In a fragmented industry, we didn't want to be going up against, like Amazon, or a giant competitor that took up 60, 70, 80% of the space and just leaving us with crumbs, and like location based, which I alluded to before. And we also had an EBITDA range, basically an earnings potential range of what we were looking for. And he heard that. And, I was really skeptical at first, because like I didn't want to, own a Baskin Robbins or whatever. No disrespect to those who do, doing the Lord's work, but was not for me. But he came back with a list of franchises that most of them nearly fit the description of what we were looking for. And the first on the list was 1-800-Striper, which is parking lot striping business. And it's simple. You get a truck and some machines, and there you're off. So the thought was, okay, could we use this as a bridge, as a stepping stone to get down to South Florida and make this jump? And within, if the expected time frame of 2 years was what we would look at to actually buy a business, could we build something comparable within that 2 year span? And, then once we do that, look up and see what other opportunities are present. And so we decided to make the jump. I think a big factor was also the fact that we had a child at the time, less than a year old, and we really were not happy with raising him in the New York City area. We were living in Jersey City at the time, but it felt inconducive to raising a family, and you just can't get those times back that you spend with your children. So
Did you meet your wife at a time when you were already thinking about leaving Goldman Sachs and she knew that it was going to be on the cards, or was it a bit of a surprise for her?
I don't know. I don't think it was surprise her. I had met my wife. I met my wife twice online. I would joke the old fashioned way. Yeah, she was catfishing me on Grinder, and no, I'm joking. She we met. She actually went to school in New York City. She studied graphic design at the New School at Parsons, and she was also a grade above me by school age. So when we first met, I was new to the city, fresh out of college, and politely, as she can, she basically told me to get lost after I think 2 or 3 dates because I was just working like an animal, and was just new to the city, and doing rather or just acting in a rather ridiculous way, which is fine. I guess not. And then 3 years later, my birthday actually, we matched on a different dating platform, Hinge. The first one was Bumble, and I remember she goes, "Well, well, well, look who it is." It was my birthday, and I might have been a little overserved, and so I just texted or sent back, "Dinner tomorrow?" Question mark, and woke up the next day and had a date, and here we are, probably about 6, maybe 7 years later. We'd been dating by that point. We'd been married for by the time we made the decision to leave, almost 2 years. We've been dating for before that for 3 or 4, and I'd voiced this. I think I'd signaled enough that hey, I'm looking to do something different with my life. That it wasn't at all a surprise for her, and she also knows the type of person who I am, and see me do a lot of sort of random, seemingly sporadic ventures.
Quite a change for her, though, as well. Though I imagine, did she have a career in design?
She did. She did. And well, she had always wanted to be a mother. She was very, very clear with that from very early on when we were dating.
Mm.
And when we had our son, she had actually been on a 6-month maternity leave and then elected for another 6-month extended leave without pay because she wanted to really focus on raising our son. That's very high priority for the both of us, that she's able to care for him. So in her mind, her career always took a backseat to family, rightfully so. And, I think she had a little bit of dissonance maybe with what she was doing, but nowhere near to the point of what I think I was feeling in terms of like what I'm doing versus like purpose. Not that parking on striping is, I wouldn't say it's our purpose or anything like that, but it's a stepping stone and a means to an end to, I think correcting or trying to get on the right path for our lives.
You said earlier, Isaiah, that you sensed that there was an entrepreneur in you. You wanted to be the captain of your own ship. How's that been for you when you compare your expectation of what being that was to what it actually is?
I had a little bit of a sense of it. So with my cousin, we own a few investment properties in the Philadelphia area, and so I had a taste of sort of the very like low level stuff of making sure things get done and all this stuff. But owning rental properties or whatnot, it's much different than owning a business. In terms of if I don't know if there is a way I could have gotten my mind attuned or understood what it would be like. In a lot of ways, it's a rude awakening. In a lot of ways, there are kind of like, oh, I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do this. But in other ways, I mean, there are a lot of like pleasant surprises too. I mean, it's a roller coaster for one. I think two things. I think I'm always very intensely sort of focused on the present, and so it's tough for me to really look back and envision myself what it'll be like then, but also to honestly kind of look forward and think about what that would be like. And then two, it really is one of those things that I don't think you can have a true conception of what it's going to be like when, you're not in it. Just having a salary, right? Versus going out and having to scrounge and try to squeeze money out of something, whatever it might be, it's vastly different. And, if you're habituated to doing that in that world, unless you really, I think, like violently shake it up, I don't know if there, for me, I'll say that much. For me, I don't know if there was a way that I could have prepared better. I mean, sure, always things could have been done better, more artfully or whatnot, but I don't know what I could have done to wrap my mind around what it exactly would have been like.
So, how long have you had the franchise now? How long have you been down in South Florida?
We opened up July 1st, so we are about to finish our third month. Like it's very fresh, very new.
Wow. And what's the biggest thing you've learned about yourself in that time?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I guess I guess I just find myself. I think what I learned is that the same kid who is hustling to get onto to Wall Street and make things happen is still there. I did. I think the biggest psychological change for me was when I was going to try to break into Wall Street and all that stuff. I was moving out of a negative space, right? Like I was running from something, and that can be quite a powerful force. Obviously, the gap of where I was to where I got to speaks to that. But I think in the back of my mind, I would almost say like a quiet fear that, well, one, I knew I was trying to move into something new, but out of a positive pull, not a push. I was trying to find something different, find new challenges, find a level of, financial freedom and independence and all this stuff, and build a lifestyle that was on my own terms. And I think within that, though, you also, once you get comfortable relatively, it only has to be a small, like small modicum of comfort. You kind of worry that you get a little bit, psychologically flabby.
What a great term.
Yeah. And, I always think back to, like, I knew there would have to be something dramatic to really shake it up especially because I had that, feeling of like understanding what it's like to live in financial insecurity, and like worrying about that type of stuff, that it would have to be a pretty dramatic shakeup to break me out of that. And so knowing that the same person who or worrying that like that person was lost has been but seeing that we can still work hard, be creative and crafty in a lot of ways. And I don't think hard work in itself is a value, but that's a different story. But like willing to hustle and make things happen, and that they still can. That has been I think probably like the biggest thing of like, okay, I haven't I haven't lost, I think, that edge of that stubbornness and persistence.
On reflection, do you think that was part of the discomfort that you were feeling in Goldman Sachs, that you were concerned that part of you had gone?
Yeah, I'd say that was part of it in terms of.
Because presumably you had to hustle inside Goldman Sachs. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's a very competitive place to be, and you have to be dynamic. And I mean, even when I was there, I was constantly learning things. Like I taught myself how to code. I made a switch. I was actually started on a sales trading role, and I did a switch to trading, which it almost never happens in that direction. People had to take a lot of risk on me as well, to be fair. And kudos to them and all that stuff.
so you managed to get back to your 8-year-old nerdy self with the computers and the coding.
Yeah, I live in like this weird space where I'm part Luddite, part technical person. I mean, I think I just look at technology as a tool, and so I try to remain probably as low tech as possible in those facets of my life. Either way, I try to make sure that things are they're rather simple.
I'm really interested to explore that, both for my sake and the sake of the listener. So, what does that look like in practice?
Um, I mean, like I try to, I think, limit my own screen time as much as possible. I limit my son's screen time. I mean, we don't have a television in our house. I try to, I'm not a very app heavy person. I hate using apps. I think a lot of tech tries to disintermediate or intermediate experiences. And so like, if I order out, I'll call a restaurant directly, but I almost never order out. I try to always pick things up in person. Yeah, I don't. Maybe you call me in too raw of a thought for me to put like a cogent type of story behind it, but
It's inspiring. It's inspiring though to hear. I mean, I know that I probably spend too much time in front of a screen, and I'm probably the opposite of not being app heavy, and it's just really reassuring, I guess, in a way, to hear that it's possible to let that go, and it's kind of inspired me to do better at it.
well, I mean, look, I'm not like a paragon of any of that stuff. I'm not about to go build a cabin in, Montana or anything. I still live in the world, and I still use my phone. I mean, actually, since my son is here, I've been using my phone more because oftentimes, like when I write, I'm literally writing in the notes app for use of an app. But yeah, I really try not to. I try to have it, make things as ideally as simple and as disintermediated as possible.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned your son there, and I just want to reflect back on something you said earlier in the conversation when we were talking about schooling system, education system. I mean, that must be front of mind for you now with a son's growing older, is going to be going into that, or is he? I mean, what are you going to do about the education of your children in light of how you feel about it?
I mean, our current plan is to pursue alternative education methods. He's not even 2 yet, but I mean, we don't plan on putting him into a daycare. We've explored homeschooling, forest schooling.
What's that second one?
Forest schooling. There are things that are called forest schools, where essentially kids are grouped together, but it's much closer to where you have a group of similarly minded parents, and they effectively usually take kids out into nature and then teach lessons about the world through that. There are like a variety of other things and a full spectrum of stuff, but I think ideally we would most likely keep our kid out of public school, at least for the early formative years, and be able to have a much bigger say in self-directing their education. Now, I mean, I say that from a space of humility, knowing that man plans and God laughs. Um, and I'm sure that there are plenty of other parents out there who might take that as offense of like, oh well, who the fuck are you? Excuse my French, but to say this, and my kid isn't even school age. So I mean, we'll see, but currently that's the plan. I mean, like I said, like my wife is even in this new venture. She's my partner in this, but she's primarily focused on raising our son day in and day out. And again, kind of on the disintermediation standpoint, we're trying to, I think, in as many ways as possible, not offshore the major decisions of our life, or outsource them as much as possible. And I think that really starts with how we raise our family.
And I want to come back to the writing, because it was the article that you wrote about the move from Goldman Sachs to where you are now. At what point did it even occur to you that that was something that you wanted to do, let alone actually do?
I had my senior year in college. I was fortunate enough to really have a great professor who took me under his wing in a way. And he basically crafted a solo study type of course, which I took for basically, I think, either a semester or a full year. We would just pick random books. He was a psychology professor, but he was very erudite, and wealth of different things across history and philosophy, theology, even. We basically would do that, and I think I fell in love with writing then, because it allowed me to really sit with a thought and try to crystallize it and work through it. And I think that's still what I really do. Is yeah, I have random ideas. I just have things buzzing in my head, and writing them down, and then figuring out, okay, what do I mean by this? Let me explore this. Let me connect this to why I think that, especially with I have things that are so disparate in my head that I feel are actually really connected at their core. How do I bridge that? How do I make sense of that? And so writing was big for that. When I first got to the city, and I was feeling a lot of dissonance with what I was doing, I wasn't feeling, I would say, like holistically fulfilled with the job. And again, it's probably a me problem. It's not a them problem. I used to go, I would like run around to different writers groups and all types of things. I would do, you know, crafting certain types of pieces and bringing up ideas. I used to do open mic nights with like poetry and even comedy and all types of other shit. But I spent a lot of time, and I had this other small blog that I would just share with like really close friends and family, where I wrote personal essays and or things that informational essays and things that were just really top of mind for me, present for me for years. But I really fell in love with writing as a way to communicate ideas. I think it helps me. It's self-serving. Like, it helps me work through a lot of things. And so Substack I have, it's not, it's not just popping out of nowhere. A lot of it is things that I've hopefully thought through for a long while, or had thoughts about, interspersed with sort of anecdotes from my past, either at Goldman or before then, to what I'm dealing with right now, and kind of like connecting and bringing all those things together. It's really rewarding.
That's really interesting to hear, Isaiah, because I mean, you said at the beginning that you expressed surprise at the response that your first article had on Substack. And I think, for me anyway, one of the reasons that I responded to it was because it was so deep. There was nothing superficial about it. It was evidently something that wasn't just rushed off in 15 minutes, and not just because of the length of it. There's obviously some deep thinking had gone into it. And it's interesting to hear that is and was the case.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think the response that people had to it, it was humbling in a lot of ways. When I made that choice, I didn't signal it, I didn't communicate it very far. I was told not to, because people would tell me that I'd be laughed out of the room.
But people told you couldn't get a college scholarship as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. I agree.
Prove them wrong.
I think the most heartwarming thing were the number of people who said that it really resonated with them, and it sat with them heavily, or they felt attuned to it. I'm not like a big person. Oh, I do this for something bigger than myself. Like, no, like, I'm making this choice for my own life. I'm making this choice, for my family. Because I wanted to and I needed to. In a lot of ways, it's a very selfish type decision. But I will say I'm still human, despite my best efforts. And and when you take a step, I think, away from the crowd, to feel that other people, have had a lot of the same thoughts, and very surprising, some of the people who reached out, and pleasantly surprising. You can't help but be a little touched by that. So yeah.
I've used the word a few times. It's inspiring to know that just because you're on a particular track doesn't mean you have to stay on it. You can change.
Yeah, right. I think life, and again, I'm speaking way too broadly, way too poetically, probably. I look at my life, I think, wow, I only have this set amount of time here, you know, and we're thrown into this world, right? We have no inkling of what's going on, and we're not a blank slate. We have circumstances we're born into, families, times that shape so much of our lives, but yet we're still given the tools to really craft this. Like, we're given a canvas that, maybe the background is filled in, but we're still given a lot of the tools that we can, where we can paint or add on or make a collage of whatever else is left. And one of the biggest senses for me was the idea of, like, am I doing enough with this time that I have to do this, to make the most out of this time here? I used to get really moody, and my wife would just be like, "What's wrong?" And I would just be like, "Am I being overly safe with my life? Like, am I doing enough with my life? Like, is there more to this? Just what's available, or just what I've been doing?" And usually she'd, you know, tell me, like, calm down a little bit. Like, but I think that's always been sort of a warring thing, a warring idea and thought within me. Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. And I do want to kind of just, on the back of what you just said there, you've talked about this uh, parking lot striping franchise being a stepping stone. You use that term, stepping stone, a few times. What do you see it as a stepping stone to? I mean, just coming back to this 19-year-old, 20-year-old Isaiah that had a vision that he wanted to kind of lock into, that he didn't a vision more about what he didn't want. He didn't want the financial stress and everything that he had experienced. What do you see in the future for you and your family that you're willing to be stubborn about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I want this to be built into a viable business, something that provides level of, let's say, financial security, even potential freedom for me and my family. Beyond that, I could easily see us looking to try to buy or build ancillary businesses or completely separate things from that. I always said that, you should have dreams so big that you're almost embarrassed to reveal them. Like, people would laugh at them. And I do.
I won't laugh. I promise.
I know, but I think for the time being, sort of the bigger stages of what I would love to do, we'll see what comes about. And the furthest thing from, I think as an entrepreneur, you have to, and I say this again from a place of humility, from a pseudo entrepreneur, even, right? Like I'm
3 months in.
3 months in and opening, I'm opening a franchise. I'm not starting my own thing from scratch. But I think you have to be both at one time, like almost exuberantly, insanely optimistic about your chances.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the other time, be like the biggest pessimist there is of like, what if this goes wrong? What if this goes wrong? What if this, like,
yeah.
And like hold those two thoughts. And I don't have, this might not work out and we'll see what happens from there. Be a big zag. Who knows? But it might, and then, continue to move forward. So yeah. I think that ideally the end state is something much larger than just being a parking lot striper for right now.
I get that very much. Well, listen, Isaiah, it's been a joy to share your non-straight line journey with you. Just the bits that we've touched on. There is one burning question that I've had in the back of my mind the whole of this conversation is: did you ever get to build the computer that you got the parts for?
Did not, still have not. We probably could have a few years ago, but I'm not nearly as interested, I think, in computers as I was. And right now, I mean, we just, out of the need for survival, have economically simplified our lives to a very, very extreme extent, especially around, non-essential items, I'd say. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing your life with us. It's inspired me, and I'm sure it's inspired the listener as well in same or different ways. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Pete. This has been great.
There is one question that I ask all my guests at the end of the conversation, and that is, whose non-straight line journey would you like to hear? Who should I reach out to invite on the show?
I would love to hear the story of Camille Paglia. She was an art history teacher at UArts. She's rather senior now. She might have actually retired. But from what I understand, she has dedicated now her life to studying like local Indian or Native American tribes and understanding their cultural dynamics. But she's a very, I'd say, idiosyncratic thinker. Has been writing since the 90s at least. She was kind of a paragon, or had a little bit of fame back then for being a cultural critic. But she has a real true deep grasp of the history of ideas, of philosophy, also of art and what shapes the world. And everything of hers that I've read, I've absolutely loved. Some of it I've wanted to tear the page out and just read over and over again.
Wonderful. I've never heard of her, so thanks for that recommendation. It goes on my future guest list, so look out for it.
Will do.
Once again, thanks, Isaiah. Really appreciate you.
No problem, Pete. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Not a Straight Line. If this conversation helped to reorient your internal compass or inspired you in any way, please let us know by heading to podcast.notastraightline.life/rate and leave a rating and review. Thanks, as always, to Matthew Bliss of MB Podcast Services for his exquisite engineering of this episode. If you'd like him to help you with your podcast, contact details are in the show notes. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, or there's someone whose non-straight line journey you'd just love to hear, then please visit podcast.notastraightline.life/guest. Thanks for being here with me, and I'll see you next week for another amazing, deep, inspiring, non-straight line journey. Love you.